Hello everyone. That is one of my favorite things to play of all time. And it's just fun to play, and a lot of my non-trumpet / cornet playing friends who have seen this Facebook Live of me doing that opening to Rhapsody in Blue, they've asked me, how do you do that thing with the going from the low up to the high note, and it sounds like you're not pressing any. They just say, how do you do that? Well, let me just explain it very quickly, and I'm going to do my best to explain it in layman's terms. So here's a cornet, and same principles apply to a trumpet, same thing. Now, anytime you press down a valve, well, let me start by saying that, hello Eric Weiss. Every time, the way that the pitch changes on a trumpet or a cornet is just the same principle as a pipe organ. The bigger the pipe, the lower the pitch. And so if you extend the tubing of a pipe on an organ, it's going to have a little bit lower pitch. So that's the same thing that you have when you have a trumpet or a cornet. So, and I'm also answering the question of how do you get so many notes out of just 3 valves. So I want you to look at this thing. This is the second. I'm going to press down the second valve. So as you can see, this little tubing is attached to the second valve. So anytime I press down the second valve, there are little holes in the valve. Check that out. So when I press down the second valve, the holes in that valve are lining up with the holes that are in this tubing right here. So pressing down the valve allows the air to go through this amount of tubing. So that is just a little bit more tubing that the air is going through that is going to lower the pitch by a half step, if you're familiar with music theory. Now, if I were to press down the first valve, here you go. Let me show you that. Maybe you can see it a little better on this angle. It's the tubing is, again, there's holes on the valve, and it is opening up this amount of tubing. It's slightly longer tubing than the second valve tubing. So because of that longer tubing, it's going to be another half step. So down from open, it's going to be a whole step. Now, if I were to press down first and second, now it's this amount of tubing plus this amount of tubing, so it's going to be a step and a half, otherwise known as minor third. Now if I were to do the second and third, here we go. Now that slide right here, the third valve slide, is rather long. Combine that with the second and third is going to be this amount of tubing plus this amount of tubing. It's going to go down a major third. The idea is that first and third will be this amount of tubing plus this amount of tubing. Just a minute. Okay, I'm almost done. I'll be right up. Okay, I'll be right up, okay? All right, so the point is that anytime you push down a valve, you're extending the length of tubing that the air is going through, and so you're going to lower the pitch. And so depending on the combination of valves that you use, that is going to determine the pitch. Now, the way that you're able to make so many notes out of only 3 valves is that each open note is what's called a partial, and there are several, and they go smaller in intervals the higher up the staff you go. So I'm going to start on the low C. Okay, so anytime you start on the open, I played a C, G, middle C up to an E, G on top of the staff, and then a high C. Anytime you do that, you have the same combination of valves, and it's going to have the same the same level of pitch changing with that combination of valves. And it's the same thing on each of those partials, and that is how you're able to get so many notes out of only 3 buttons. So it's funny how a lot of kids say that they want to play the trumpet or the cornet because it only has 3 buttons, whereas a saxophone or a flute has so many buttons, and they're fooled into thinking that the trumpet is easier because it only has 3 valves. Well, the thing about it is that because of this thing that I'm just describing, it's much more difficult because of that. So many a trumpet player or cornet player has been fooled into choosing it because they think it's easy, when in fact it's much more difficult just because of that. All right, so how do we do the glissando? That is what it's called when you start low and you sort of, I guess it's one of those words that it sort of the description matches the words. So it's just like a kind of a gliss. It glisses up, nice and fluid.
Daddy,
and the way you do it,
Daddy,
what? I'll be right up, son.
Rumble
Okay, I'll be right up. I'll be right up, okay? All right. So the way you do it is you basically just put down maybe the second and third valve about halfway. And so this is going to give the effect of the air it's not going to be, the stoppage of air isn't going to be as pronounced as when they're all the way down. So you have this effect of, I guess, a little bit, it's not, I don't think uncertainty is the word that I'm looking for, but it's just, you just have more fluidity with the pitch when the, I mean, if you could see inside, the valves, the holes are about halfway covered. So with that, you have a little bit more fluidity with the pitch than when the valves are either all the way up or all the way down. So you start on the middle G. So I just pushed the second and third valve down. It really doesn't matter the combination of valves. It doesn't have to be second and third. It could be first and second, whatever works for you. But the point is that you're going from one partial up to the next partial, and it's very fluid with the way it goes. So now I'm going to go from a middle G up to the E, which is the next E up the scale. Okay, so I'm going up 2 partials, but you can't hear the partials as well. Now, if you really sit down and you really listen, you can hear where the C hits, but again, because the valves are halfway down, the pitch is much more fluid. With the notes are not as pronounced as you pass them on the scale. Now I'm going to go up a full octave from a middle G. This is a middle G up to a G on top of the staff. Now if you listen closely, you could hear where the notes, where the partials were hitting. You have to listen very closely, and maybe you didn't hear it, but I could hear, when I was playing, I could hear where I was hitting the C and then the E on the glissando from the G up to the G. So now I'm going to do the middle G up to the high C on a glissando. So you can can hear, if you listen very closely, it really takes a finely tuned, a very finely trained ear to be able to hear what I'm talking about, is hearing those notes in the partials. But they're very difficult to discern, and really when you're in a performance setting and you're not really listening, you don't really have you're not going over the stuff with a fine-tooth comb, you're really not going to hear it all that much. So that is how you do the low notes all the way up to the high note with the what's called a glissando. So here we go. Thanks for watching.